Airlines were becoming an important mode of travel leading into the Second World War. America, with its strong focus on trade, was in a better position than some of the other nations when war came. This was especially apparent in the transportation systems that they had created over the years. Another was the understanding of the importance of high-altitude flying. This was leading to research and testing on subjects like pressurization and better functioning engines at higher altitudes. One line of testing was in superchargers. User experience was an initial drive for the airlines in the 1930s. High-altitude flying had many benefits for the airlines. The problem was over 10,000 feet the air was too thin to breathe and the temperatures would become very low. Military flyers would use oxygen masks for their high-altitude operations, but the airlines knew that the average passenger would not think so highly of both mask and freezing temperatures. This led them into the area of researching pressurization and could it be made viable. The military was also interested in the idea, and the US Army Air Corps was doing tests in a Lockheed L-10A Electra. The first airliner to be released with the feature was Boeing's Model 307. This would become the Stratoliner. This would draw heavily upon the B-17 and use the engines, nacelles, wings and tail. The fuselage was new and it was larger to accommodate passengers. Pan Am, TWA and even Howard Hughes would order one. The prototype would fly in 1938 and was meant to go to Pan Am. It was being used as a demonstrator to try and obtain more sales and crashed during one of these demonstrations. It was decided to do some modifications to improve flight stability. These modifications would end up being delivered on the B-17s. Howard Hughes intended his to break his own round-the-world record. His would be modified with extra fuel tanks, but war was declared and the attempt was cancelled indefinitely. He would later convert his plane into a sky yacht with a lavish interior, but it was very rarely used. TWA was involved in flight training in the war effort. Their centre, located in Albuquerque, would be used to train British aircrews. This was done in part because the US was safe airspace, but also the Brits were receiving more US-made planes. Pan Am would become involved in the transatlantic ferry operation, which was designed to move aircraft to where they were needed. The first of these would be several Lockheed Hudson bombers. The airlines were still looking for ways to extend their trade routes leading up to the outbreak of war. December 7th would come as a bit of a shock to some of the aircrews en route to Hawaii. A Pan Am Boeing 314, the Anzac Clipper, was about an hour away when the attack happened. It had to make for an alternate landing zone before it could return to San Francisco, while a Martin 130 was heading to Wake Island to collect airline personnel. Other aircraft in the Pacific would have to make a long journey home. At the start of the war, the Army and Navy requested aircraft. They were not always sure what to do with the planes and flying boats they received, as these were not designed with military use in mind. The Clippers had excellent range, however, and were used in transport duties. Another flying boat operator was the American Export Airlines. They had planned to use the Voigt-Sikorsky VS-44 Excalibur flying boats to operate from the US to Europe. They were in the process of getting the legalities for the route done when war broke out in Europe. They would end up flying from the US to Lisbon. When war came to the US in 1941, these aircraft would find themselves contracted to Navy use. TWA Stratoliners would be taken over by the government while the airline would still be responsible for their operation. For the smaller carriers, they often found themselves in somewhat unfamiliar territory. The lessons learned would do them well after the end of the war. In the end, the civilian airlines did not have a huge impact to the overall transportation throughout the war. However, their efforts early on paved the way for larger airlifting of goods and troops which was to come.